The day my own mother turned against me was the day I understood what true loneliness felt like. I remember standing in the doorway, the flimsy eviction notice clutched in my trembling hands, watching her usher my brother inside my house, a house I'd poured my heart and savings into. The rain was coming down in sheets, mirroring the storm inside me, and all I could do was stand there, numb, as the life I'd built crumbled before my eyes. They thought they had broken me, but little did they know they had only ignited a fire that would consume them all. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, subscribe now to hear stories of strength and resilience in the face of family injustice. It all started innocently enough. Eileen had always been the responsible one, the reliable daughter. While my brother, Jake, coasted through life, charming everyone with his easy smile and perpetually empty pockets, I worked tirelessly. I saved every penny, sacrificed every luxury, with one goal in mind: to buy a home, a place where I could finally feel safe and secure. And I did it. After years of scrimping and saving, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest but charming house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I poured my heart and soul into fixing it up, painting the walls a warm, inviting yellow, planting a vibrant garden in the front yard, turning it into a place I was proud to call home. My mother, bless her heart, seemed genuinely happy for me. She visited often, admiring my handiwork, offering advice on everything from furniture placement to gardening tips. Jake, on the other hand, rarely visited. He was always too busy chasing his latest get-rich-quick scheme or flitting from one dead-end job to another. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes, despite his constant failures and his blatant mooching. Then, one day, Jake lost his apartment. Or more accurately, he was evicted for failing to pay rent for several months. He called my mother, predictably, begging for help. And my mother, predictably, rushed to his rescue. She called me, her voice laced with that familiar pleading tone that always made me feel guilty and obligated. "Eleanor, darling," she said, "Jake has nowhere to go. He's really down on his luck. Could he maybe stay with you for a little while, just until he gets back on his feet?" I hesitated. I loved my brother despite his flaws, but I also knew his track record. A little while with Jake usually meant indefinitely. I explained to her it wouldn't work. The house was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and that I needed my own space. I didn't want to be responsible for him. I worked hard for that house. My mother was unusually insistent. I folded as I always did. "Okay, Mom," I sighed. "He can stay for a couple of weeks tops, but he needs to start looking for a new place immediately." Those 2 weeks stretched into a month, then two, then three. Jake made no effort to find a job or an apartment. He spent his days lounging on my couch, watching television, and eating my food. He left his dirty dishes in the sink, his clothes strewn across the floor, turning my once pristine home into a chaotic mess. I tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but he just brushed me off with a charming smile and a promise to take care of it later. My mother, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the situation. She continued to visit, showering Jake with attention and praise while barely acknowledging my existence. She would bring him his favorite snacks and drinks, cook his favorite meals, and generally treat him like a king. I felt like an invisible servant in my own home. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. I woke up to find Jake throwing a party in my living room. The music was blasting, people were dancing, and the air was thick with the smell of substances and cheap beer. I was furious. I stormed into the living room and demanded that everyone leave. Jake, drunk and belligerent, refused. He told me to lighten up, to stop being such a buzzkill. We argued, our voices escalating until we were both screaming. I told him he was disrespectful, irresponsible, and a complete leech. He told me I was jealous of his success and that I was just a bitter old maid who would never find happiness. My mother walked into the room during this argument and immediately sided with Jake. She accused me of being mean and ungrateful, of not appreciating all that Jake did for the family. She said that Jake was the only one who truly cared about her, and that I was just a selfish, cold-hearted shrew. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that my own mother would say such things to me. I was so hurt and angry that I didn't know what to say. I ran to my room and slammed the door, tears streaming down my face. I heard my mother and Jake laughing outside my door, their words like knives twisting in my heart. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to take back control of my life. I went to a lawyer and explained my situation. He informed me that because I was the sole owner of the house, I had the legal right to evict Jake. He drafted an eviction notice and advised me to serve it to Jake immediately. I hesitated. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I knew that it was the only way to get Jake out of my house. The next morning, I steeled myself and handed Jake the eviction notice. He read it, his face turning red with anger. He crumpled the notice in his fist and threw it at me, screaming that I had no right to treat him like this. My mother, who was standing nearby, rushed to his defense. She grabbed me by the arm and dragged me outside, yelling that I was a disgrace to the family. She told me that I was no longer welcome in her life and that she was disowning me. And then she did the most unbelievable thing of all. She told me to leave my house, that Jake needed a place to stay, and that I was being selfish by not letting him have it. She said she'd always loved Jake more. The person I trusted most was one of them. The rain was relentless that night, soaking me to the bone as I stood on the sidewalk, watching my mother and brother disappear inside my house. My house. The injustice of it all was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. My family, the people who were supposed to love and support me, had abandoned me in my moment of need. They thought I was defeated. They were wrong. I spent that night in my car, parked in a deserted parking lot, the windows fogged with condensation. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, contorted with anger, heard her words, dripping with venom. How could she do this to me? How could she choose Jake over me, after all I had done for her, for them? The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, crushing my spirit. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to do something. But what? Where could I go? I drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town, a place that reeked of stale smoke and desperation. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over my head. I paid for a week in advance, hoping that I could figure things out by then. The first few days were a blur of shock and disbelief. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think straight. I kept replaying the events of that fateful day in my mind, searching for some explanation, some way to make sense of it all. But there was none. My mother had made her choice, and I was the loser. I tried calling her, hoping to reason with her, to plead with her to see reason. But she wouldn't answer my calls. Jake, emboldened by his mother's support, sent me taunting text messages, bragging about how great his life was, how much better he was doing without me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I had to stay calm, to think clearly, to come up with a plan. I started looking for a new place to live, but it was difficult. I had used all of my savings for the down payment on the house, and now I was broke. The motel was draining my resources, and I knew I couldn't stay there for long. I applied for countless jobs, but I was either overqualified or underqualified for most of them. The few interviews I did get went nowhere. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, a never-ending cycle of rejection and despair. Desperation started to set in. I considered begging my friends for help, but I was too proud. I didn't want them to see me like this, broken and defeated. I was too ashamed to admit that my own family had thrown me out on the street. Sleepless nights turned into blurry mornings as my brain replayed every single moment. Every sacrifice, every loving gesture, every act of kindness, all of it thrown back in my face. Then a new feeling started to grow. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was anger. A cold, burning rage that consumed me from the inside out. They had taken everything from me, my home, my family, my sense of security. But they wouldn't take my spirit. I would not let them break me. I would find a way to get back on my feet, to rebuild my life, and to make them pay for what they had done. The fire was lit. The plan was being formed. It would take time. It would take patience. But I would not rest until justice was served. They may have thought they had won, but they had only awakened a sleeping giant. And this giant was about to unleash its fury. The days that followed were a descent into a personal abyss. The motel room became my prison, the stained walls mirroring the decay of my hope. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance was a reminder of my isolation. I stopped eating, the meager meals I could afford turning to ash in my mouth. Sleep offered no escape, only a relentless replay of the betrayal, the echo of my mother's cruel words. I was losing weight, my reflection in the cracked mirror a ghost of my former self. The job applications piled up, each rejection a fresh wound. My phone lay silent, devoid of calls or messages. The world outside the motel room went on, oblivious to my suffering, and I felt like I was fading away, becoming invisible. One evening, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the flickering neon sign outside my window, the red glow casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The weight of my despair was crushing me. I felt like giving up, like succumbing to the darkness. What was the point of fighting? I had lost everything that mattered to me. My family, my home, my future. I was alone, penniless, and without hope. Maybe Jake and my mother were right. Maybe I was just a bitter old maid destined to a life of loneliness and misery. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, and I imagined what it would be like to simply disappear, to cease to exist. To end the pain, to find peace. The thought was tempting, a siren's song luring me towards the edge. But then something shifted. A flicker of defiance, a spark of anger. A memory surfaced, unbidden, of my grandmother, a woman of immense strength and resilience who had faced unimaginable hardships in her life and had always emerged victorious. She had taught me to never give up, to always fight for what I believed in, to never let anyone break my spirit. Her words echoed in my mind, a lifeline in the darkness. No, I thought, I will not let them win. I will not let them break me. I will not give up. I opened my eyes, my gaze hardening. The tears still flowed, but they were now tears of anger, of determination. I would not let their cruelty define me. I would not allow them to steal my life. I would fight back. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room. I pulled out a pen and a piece of paper, and I began to write, not a letter of surrender but a declaration of war. I wrote down everything they had done to me, every injustice, every betrayal. I wrote down my plan, my strategy for revenge. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all I had. As I wrote, my anger transformed into a cold, calculating resolve. I would not let them see my pain. I would not let them know my fear. I would become a ghost, a shadow, watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They thought they had broken me, but they had only forged me into a weapon. And that weapon was about to be unleashed. They were about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. The first step was to gather information. I needed to know everything about Jake and my mother, their finances, their relationships, their secrets. I would use every resource at my disposal, every skill I possessed, to uncover the truth. I would become their worst nightmare. I started small, scouring social media, searching for clues. I created fake profiles, infiltrated their online circles, listening and observing. I learned that Jake was still unemployed, still living in my house, still mooching off my mother. I learned that my mother was struggling financially, her savings dwindling as she supported Jake's extravagant lifestyle. I learned that their relationship was strained, filled with arguments and resentment. They were not as happy as they pretended to be. Their facade was cracking. Emboldened, I started digging deeper. I contacted old friends, distant relatives, anyone who might have information about their past. I pieced together a history of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. I discovered that Jake had a long history of substance abuse and petty crime, things my mother had always covered up. I discovered that my mother had made a series of bad investments, leaving her on the verge of bankruptcy. The more I learned, the more my anger grew. They were not the innocent victims they portrayed themselves to be. They were liars, cheats, and manipulators, and they were about to pay for their sins. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. I needed leverage, something undeniable. That's when I remembered Jake's weakness, his arrogance. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else, that he could get away with anything. And my mother, her weakness was Jake. She'd do anything for him, even if it meant hurting others. I decided to use their weaknesses against them. My plan was multi-layered, a carefully constructed house of cards. The first step was financial. I knew my mother was struggling, and Jake was bleeding her dry. I started discreetly gathering information about their bank accounts, their spending habits, their debts. I learned that they were both heavily in debt, and that my mother was on the verge of losing the house. This was my opening. I contacted a real estate investor, a ruthless businessman who specialized in buying distressed properties. I told him about my situation, about my mother's financial woes, and about her desperation to keep the house. He was interested. He offered to buy the house from her at a steep discount, enough to pay off her debts but leaving her with nothing. I knew it was a cruel move, but it was necessary. I needed to create chaos, to sow discord between them. I gave him the green light. He contacted my mother, posing as a potential buyer. He played on her fears, her insecurities, her desperation. He offered her a deal that seemed too good to be true. She took it. The day she signed the papers, selling my house out from under Jake, was a day I allowed myself a small, private smile. The second step involved Jake's extracurricular activities. I had learned through my online snooping that he was involved in some shady dealings, selling substances to his friends and acquaintances. I knew this was illegal, and I knew it could land him in serious trouble. I started documenting his activities, gathering evidence of his transgressions. I took photos, recorded conversations, and collected witness statements. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. I needed to make sure that he paid for his actions. I compiled all the evidence into a comprehensive dossier, ready to be delivered to the authorities at the opportune moment. The waiting was the hardest part. Seeing them living in my house, enjoying the life that I had worked so hard to build, filled me with rage. I had to remind myself that this was all part of the plan, that justice was coming. I started visiting the local library, researching the laws regarding property rights and tenant evictions. I wanted to make sure that I was on solid legal ground before I made my next move. I learned that even though my mother had sold the house, Jake still had to be formally evicted, and I knew just the person to handle that. I contacted a lawyer, a fierce, no-nonsense woman who specialized in eviction cases. I explained my situation and she agreed to represent me. She drafted a new eviction notice, this one backed by the full force of the law. I imagined the look on Jake's face when he received it, the shock, the anger, the fear. It fueled me. The day I served him with the eviction notice was a sweet victory. He screamed, he cursed, he threatened, but it was all empty bluster. He knew he was cornered. My mother, of course, rushed to his defense, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel. But I didn't care. I had finally taken back control. I played the part of the grieving daughter when my mother confronted me. "How could you do this to your own brother?" she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. I looked at her, my face a mask of sorrow, and said, "I'm doing this for you, Mom. Jake is destroying your life, he's using you." She didn't believe me, of course. She was too blinded by her love for Jake to see the truth. But that was okay. The truth would come out soon enough. The most critical part of the plan was planting hidden cameras. I needed to record their conversations, their actions, their admissions of guilt. I purchased several miniature cameras, discreet and easily concealed. I waited for an opportunity to sneak into the house while they were out. It took weeks, but eventually I got my chance. They went out to dinner one evening, leaving the house unguarded. I slipped in through a back window, my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly planted the cameras in strategic locations: the living room, the kitchen, Jake's bedroom. I made sure they were well hidden, disguised as ordinary objects. I set them to record automatically, capturing everything that happened in the house. I left as silently as I had come, my mission accomplished. Now all I had to do was wait. And record. The game had begun. Waiting was agonizing, but the cameras didn't disappoint. Days turned into weeks, and the recordings painted a vivid picture of their crumbling world. I watched Jake descend further into his spiral, his paranoia growing with each passing day. He'd rant about people watching him, about conspiracies, ironically unaware of the tiny lenses capturing his every move. My mother, bless her naive heart, tried to reason with him to get him to seek help, but he'd lash out, accusing her of betraying him. Their arguments escalated, the house filled with screaming matches that echoed my own silent rage. And then I found it. Buried deep within hours of footage, a conversation so damning, so incriminating, it made my breath catch in my throat. Jake, in a moment of drunken arrogance, confessed everything. He admitted to manipulating my mother, to using her for her money, to never truly loving her. He bragged about how he had sabotaged my career, how he had spread lies and rumors to ruin my reputation. He even confessed to stealing money from me, to funding his substance habit with my hard-earned savings. The crimson of fury flooded my vision. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about years of deceit, of manipulation, of calculated cruelty. This was about a man who had systematically tried to destroy my life, but the confession wasn't the only treasure I unearthed. The camera in Jake's bedroom captured something else entirely, something that made my blood run cold. A hidden compartment in his closet, filled with bags of white powder and stacks of cash. He wasn't just using substances, he was dealing. This was the leverage I needed, the final nail in his coffin. I copied the files, backing them up on multiple drives, ensuring that nothing could erase the truth. I felt a surge of power, a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. The game was about to end. It was time to set the trap. I knew I couldn't just hand over the evidence and expect justice to be served. I needed to orchestrate a scenario, a perfect storm of consequences that would leave them both exposed and ruined. My plan hinged on Jake's next move. I knew he was getting desperate, his money running low, his paranoia reaching a fever pitch. He was bound to do something reckless. I accelerated the pressure. Using an anonymous email account, I sent a tip to the local police department, informing them of Jake's dealing activities and providing them with a vague description of the location of his stash. I knew they wouldn't find anything immediately, but it would put him on edge, force him to make a mistake. Then, I turned my attention to my mother. I knew she still had a shred of decency left, a flicker of hope that she could be saved. I decided to give her one last chance to see the truth. I crafted a carefully worded letter, laying out everything Jake had done, presenting her with the evidence I had gathered, the recordings of his confessions, the photos of his activities. I didn't accuse her, I didn't blame her. I simply presented her with the facts, hoping that she would finally open her eyes. I left the letter on her doorstep, anonymously, knowing that she would eventually find it. The pieces were in place. The stage was set. All that was left was to wait for the inevitable explosion. The call came late one night. A frantic, tearful voice on the other end of the line. It was my mother. "He's gone," she sobbed. "Jake's gone, the police. They took him away, they found things in his room." I feigned shock, struggling to suppress the satisfaction that welled up inside me. "What happened? What did they find?" I asked, my voice trembling with false concern. She recounted the events of the evening, the raid, the search, the discovery of the substances and the cash. She spoke of Jake's denials, his accusations, his desperate pleas for help. She said he blamed me. "He said you did this," she cried. "He said you set him up." I denied it, of course, playing the part of the innocent, heartbroken daughter. I offered her comfort, I offered her support. I told her that I would be there for her no matter what. But inside, I was seething. He knew. He knew that I was the one pulling the strings. And now, he was going to try to take me down with him. It wasn't over yet. As I hung up the phone, a new wave of determination washed over me. It was time for the final act. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I dressed in my most professional attire, my armor for the battle ahead. I drove to the local police station, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked through the doors, my head held high, and asked to speak to the detective in charge of Jake's case. It was time to expose the truth, once and for all. This was the day they tried to end me. But it was the day I exposed them all. The detective, a weary-looking man with kind eyes, listened patiently as I laid out my case. I presented him with the recordings, the photos, the evidence I had meticulously collected over the past months. I told him everything, from Jake's manipulation of my mother to his involvement with controlled substances and the theft of my savings, the plan to ruin my career. As he watched the footage of Jake's confession, his expression hardened. He asked questions, probing for details, testing my resolve. I answered truthfully, unflinchingly, knowing that my freedom, my future depended on it. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "This is damning," he said finally. "But it's also complicated. Your mother, she's a victim too." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. "I know," I said. "And I don't want to hurt her. I just want her to see the truth, to be free from him." The detective assured me that he would investigate thoroughly, that he would bring Jake to justice and ensure my mother's safety. He thanked me for coming forward, for trusting him with this information. As I left the police station, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was out. The wheels of justice were in motion. Now all I could do was wait. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Jake, facing overwhelming evidence, was charged with multiple felonies, including substance dealing, fraud, and theft. He pleaded not guilty, of course, but the recordings were undeniable. He was denied bail and remanded into custody, his world collapsing around him. My mother, confronted with the truth of Jake's betrayal, was devastated. The letter I had left her had finally pierced through her denial, shattering her illusions. She visited Jake in jail, hoping for an explanation, a justification, but he offered only accusations and threats. He blamed me, he blamed her, he blamed everyone but himself. Finally, she walked away, her heart broken, her spirit crushed. She lost the house, of course. The real estate investor, true to his word, evicted her. She moved into a small apartment, alone and penniless, her life in ruins. I watched from a distance, my heart aching with a mixture of pity and regret. I had wanted justice, but I hadn't wanted this. I had wanted her to be free, but I hadn't wanted her to suffer. But I knew, deep down, that this was the only way. She had to hit rock bottom before she could rebuild her life. The trial was a media circus. The story of the betrayed daughter, the manipulative boyfriend, and the unsuspecting mother captured the public's imagination. Jake's defense team tried to paint me as a vengeful, bitter woman, but the evidence was too strong. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to a long prison term, his life effectively over. As he was led away, he looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred and despair. Opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He simply shook his head, defeated. My mother never spoke to me again. I tried to reach out to offer her my support, but she refused to answer my calls. I understood. She needed time to heal, to process everything that had happened. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but for now we were strangers. In the end, justice was served. Jake paid for his crimes, my mother was free from his grasp, and I had reclaimed my life. But the victory felt hollow. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and the memories of the pain would always linger. I sold the hidden camera footage to a production company, and they want to make a true crime documentary, so at least something good came out of it. I moved away, started a new career, and surrounded myself with people who loved and supported me. I learned to trust again, to forgive, and to heal. The day I saw Jake's face on the news, his sentence read aloud, was the day I felt the last tendrils of their darkness release me. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.